Please, I'm begging you." The voice didn't sound like it belonged in the dry, wind-swept silence of the frontier. It trembled, thin and desperate, cutting through the creak of leather and the restless snort of horses. The rancher froze. Whirr. His hand was already inside the hollow, deep in the dark, narrow opening beneath the broken floorboards of the old shack. Whatever he expected to find, it wasn't this. Not the voice, not the plea Orr's fingers had just touched. The town of Black Hollow wasn't much to look at, even by the standards of the American frontier, where things got worse. A kind of place that didn't grow so much as it endured of red rock. The kind of place that didn't grow so much as it endured. A handful of wooden buildings leaned against the wind as if they were tired of standing. Worse, the saloon was the tallest structure, followed by the sheriff's office and a general store that rarely had what anyone needed. The rest, homes, barns, sheds, were scattered like afterthoughts. Black Hollow had been founded during a brief silver rush that died almost as quickly as it began. The mines dried up, but some folks stayed. They always did. People who had nowhere else to go or nowhere they wanted to return to. By 1878, the town had a reputation. Not for wealth, not for law, but for something harder to explain. Travelers spoke of unease, of strange disappearances, of men who came through and were never seen again. Most folks dismissed it as frontier gossip. Most folks were wrong. Elias Turner arrived in Black Hollow in the late summer of that same year. Of course, things got worse. The Sar tried. He was a rancher by trade. He carried himself like a man who had worked hard for every inch of land he owned and lost more than he cared to admit. Worse, his ranch sat 5 miles outside town, a modest stretch of land with a small herd of cattle and a weathered house that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was his. Of course, a short ride. Elias wasn't the kind of man who talked much. He paid his debts, kept his word, and stayed out of other people's business. In a place like Black Hollow, that was often the safest way to live, but safety has a way of slipping through your fingers when you least expect it. It started with missing cattle. At first, Elias thought it was rustlers. Wouldn't have been the first time. A head or two gone in a night wasn't unusual, especially in a town where law enforcement was more suggestion than reality. But this was different. There were no tracks, no broken fences, no signs of struggle. The cattle were simply gone. Elias rode the perimeter of his land for days, searching for anything that might explain it. The forest dried. The earth was dry and hard, but still, something should have been there. There was nothing. Then the nights grew louder, not with the usual sounds of coyotes or wind, but something else, something closer. Low, muffled noises that seemed to come from beneath the ground itself. Elias told himself it was imagination. The kind that comes from too much silence and too little sleep, or so, until the night he heard the voice. It was just past midnight when Elias woke. At first he couldn't place the sound. It was faint, like someone speaking from far away. He sat up in bed, listening, his heart already beginning to race. Please. The word drifted through the stillness, barely audible. Elias grabbed his lantern and stepped outside. The ranch was quiet. The sky stretched overhead, full of cold, indifferent stars. The wind had died, leaving the air heavy and still. I'm begging you, this time. He knew where it was coming from. The old shack, horse's eye. The shack had been on the property long before Elias bought the land. It sat near the edge of a dried creek bed, half collapsed and leaning to one side like it was trying to sink into the earth. Elias had never paid it much mind. It was too unstable to use and too far gone to repair. Just another relic of someone else's failed attempt at making a life out here. But now, as he approached it, the air seemed to change, colder, heavier. Help me. The voice was coming from inside. Elias pushed the door open with a slow creak, raising the lantern to cast light across the warped interior. Dust and debris covered the floor. Broken furniture lay scattered in corners, corsets. And then he saw it. A section of floorboards near the center of the room had been disturbed. One plank was slightly raised. The voice came from beneath it. Elias hesitated. Every instinct told him to walk away, back to the house, saddle his horse and leave Black Hollow behind without a second thought. But another part of him, the part that had kept him alive this long, pushed him forward. He knelt down and set the lantern beside the loose board. "Who's there?" he called. There was a pause. Then, barely a whisper, "Please, don't leave me." Elias swallowed hard and reached for the plank. It came loose easier than it should have. Worse things got worse. Beneath it was a narrow opening, just wide enough for a man's arm. Darkness filled the space below, thick and impenetrable. Help me, Elias took a breath and reached in. At first he felt nothing, or air brushing against his skin. Then his fingers brushed something. Soft, warm. He froze. You found me. Voice was closer now, too close. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to pull his hand back, but he couldn't. Something had wrapped around his wrist, not tight, not yet, but enough to hold him in place. What the hell, Elias began, his voice breaking. Please, the voice said again. Don't let them take me back. Them. The word hung in the air like a warning. Elias forced himself to look into the hole. First he saw nothing. Then, slowly, something moved in the darkness. A face, pale, sunken, eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't the face that made Elias freeze in shock. It was how deep it was. Of course, the hole shouldn't have been that deep. The shack sat on hard, packed earth. There was no reason for there to be any kind of chamber beneath it. And yet, the man's face was at least 6 feet below the surface. Worse things got worse, as his voice barely steady. I don't know, the man whispered. Days, maybe longer. Who did this to you? The man's grip tightened slightly, torn his hand free with a sudden jerk, stumbling back from the opening. The town, he repeated. The man nodded weakly. Bring people here at night. Anyone who asks too many questions. Anyone who doesn't belong. Elias felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Black Hollow, its reputation for us. Disappearances. You're lying, Elias said, though he didn't sound convinced. I wish I was, the man replied. Please, where? You have to get me out before they come back. Elias looked around the shack as if expecting someone to be watching. Who are you? He asked. Daniel Reeves. I came through town a week ago. Reports just passing through. Elias had seen plenty of travelers pass through Black Hollow. He couldn't remember this one. Why would they do this? Elias asked. Daniel's eyes flickered with, "For us down here." Elias stared at him. What do you mean? Daniel swallowed hard. There's more tunnels. Deeper. They've been digging for years. They've been digging for years. Bored for silver. Not for silver. Not for gold. For what then? Daniel hesitated. Then he said it. Something they found. Before Elias could respond, a sound echoed from outside the shack. Hoofbeats. More than one horse. Or bat. They're back. Elias's blood ran cold. Cover it, Daniel whispered urgently. Please. If they see you. Elias didn't need to be told twice. Or he shoved the plank back into place, scattering dust over it just as the shack door creaked open. Sheriff Colton Briggs stepped inside, followed by 2 men Elias recognized from town. We like to keep an eye on things. Ways. Especially old places like this. His gaze drifted to the floor. Elias felt his pulse spike. You hear anything unusual out here tonight? Briggs asked. Elias hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Just the wind. Briggs studied him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the sheriff nodded. Good. Best keep it that way. They left as quietly as they had arrived. But Elias knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Or next day, Elias rode into town. He watched the people of Black Hollow with new eyes. The shopkeeper who barely met his gaze. The bartender who went silent when he entered. Or the sheriff standing outside his office watching everything. And everyone. Daniel's words echoed in his mind. They bring people here at night. Elias had a choice to make. He could leave, or ride out and never look back, or he could go back to that shack. Back to the man Ben, whatever the town was hiding. That night he made his decision. Elias returned to the shack after midnight. Armed this time, he pried up the board and reached down again. Daniel was still there. "We're to get you out," Elias said. "How?" Daniel whispered. Elias looked at the narrow opening, then at the floor around it. They won't be expecting noise. It took time and effort. Elias worked like a man possessed, tearing up the floorboards, widening the opening inch by inch. The earth beneath was softer than it should have been. Disturbed, dug through. As the hole grew, the truth revealed itself. A tunnel? Worse. Leading deeper into the ground. Daniel wasn't the only one who had been down there. When Elias finally pulled him free, Daniel collapsed onto the floor, too weak to stand. "We have to go." Daniel said. Now was. But it was already too late. The sound of hoofbeats filled the night once more. Forced on confrontation came under the dim light of lanterns and the cold stare of men who had been hiding their secrets for too long. Sheriff Briggs stood at the center. Of course, you should have left it alone, Turner, he said. Elias stepped in front of Daniel. Whatever you've got down there, it ends tonight. Briggs shook his head. You don't understand. It's bigger than you. Bigger than this town. Then explain it. Briggs hesitated, and for the first time he looked uncertain. We found something in those tunnels, he said. Years ago, something that changes people. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. Show me. Briggs smiled faintly. You already have. Behind Elias, the ground shifted. The tunnel. Something was moving. Not a man. Not anything that belonged in the light. Daniel's voice trembled. Was. That's why they keep feeding it. Elias turned slowly and understood. What happened next was never written down in any official record. There were gunshots, screams, and then silence. By morning, Black Hollow was different. Sheriff Briggs was gone, so were many of the men who had stood with him. The shack had collapsed into the earth, taking the tunnels with it. Elias stayed long enough to see the sun rise, long enough to make sure nothing came back up. Then he left. Years later, travelers would still pass through the area where Black Hollow once stood. They'd find little more than scattered ruins and a patch of ground where nothing seemed to grow. Some said it was just another failed town, or said it was something else entirely. But every now and then, on the quietest nights, if you listen closely, you might still hear a voice beneath the earth. Please, I'm begging you,